100%. Even when saying it out loud, you can feel the heaviness of the human measure of perfection. And we carry this weighty standard, whether we are striving in academics, athletics, arts, or other ventures. Although we are incapable of true perfection, we are deluded into thinking perfection is attainable. This spring, our Inklings Literature class taught us to receive grace and yearn for God's divine love that we've done nothing to deserve. I've learned that instead of longing to be perfect, I must long for grace, the ability to be gracious to others through the powerful love of Christ. This is one lesson that I hope to carry with me to college and beyond. It was March, spring break was in the air, and the final few weeks of senior year were just around the corner. Yet Mr. Dominguez announced a serious challenge to his Inkling students. If we got anything less than 100% on our Fellowship of the Ring test, we would automatically get a 0. This meant that one mistake would cost us our entire test grade and our quarter grade in the class. Two options faced us. We could study to insanity or submit to apathy. My inner perfectionist told me to reread the book and fool myself into thinking I could get 100%, while my inner realist finally convinced me to give up, be a senior, skip studying, and accept a 0. Perfection was practically impossible, and we fretted over trying to explain an F, and not just any F, but a 0 to our parents. A few days later, my class was utterly relieved. The test had a loophole. If we asked Mr. Dominguez for grace, if we asked for Mr. D to take the test in our place, we would receive his perfect score. And each of us, and all our Inklings predecessors, chose grace, our undeserved 100%. This acted as a metaphor of our receiving grace from God. When grace was offered and we realized we needed it, we couldn't refuse it. Since I can't achieve perfection, I ask myself, why don't I hunger for grace and ask Christ for it every day? After all, our God is ready, waiting, and overjoyed to extend a full portion of grace to each of us. I like how Isaiah 30:18 characterizes God's grace. The Lord longs to be gracious to you. He waits on high to have compassion on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. How blessed are all those who long for him. I find it amazing that an all-powerful God longs to be gracious to me. Grace isn't a benevolence he tosses to us with a shrug of his shoulders or a grudging attitude. He actually is waiting expectantly for us. Besides desiring for us to unwrap his gift of unmerited favor, he waits for us to long for him in return. I find that he truly desires to extend his unconditional love to us, and he has good plans for our lives. I realize that I don't need to get 100% to please him. I need a humbled heart that is ready to accept his grace. As I read Henry Nouwen's book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, I saw how each of us are prodigal sons. We are the son who fails, but finally asks for grace. At first, we may see our sin as too filthy for God to ever forgive. At first, we may believe God is ashamed of our lack of perfection and our poor choices. Yet God embraces us like the prodigal son's loving father who runs to his vagabond son, longing to wrap him in finery and unconditional love. In spite of our sin, we are lifted up as sons and daughters of the living God. And this truth of gentle grace is to be treasured as the costly gift of Christ's sacrifice. It's a matter of recognizing our need for the gift and asking for it. My eyes were also open to the lesson of the Father's elder son, the loyal son, the proud son. When we slip into the role of the elder son, we complain, resenting the grace lavished on the younger son, whose sin is obvious. Despite the hidden nature of our discontented, joyless hearts, and though we may appear perfect or think we can get 100% on our own, our sin is just as in need of God's gracious forgiveness as the prodigal son's. If we acknowledge that no matter how much we strive, we can't be perfect, and in fact, that we're not expected to be perfect, we can humble ourselves and run to meet the embrace of our gracious Savior. Not only does God wait to be gracious to us, but he also desires for his children to give grace to each other. Wherever God sends us next, we can impact the world with his gracious love. As we, the class of 2009, journey on, let's delight in God's grace and extend this blessing to one another.